Mike, you're going to start off with some technical things, right?
That's correct. Yep. Welcome, everybody. We'll get started in just a few moments here. I want to give people a chance to get connected to audio if it's taking a little longer for some rather than others. And I'll make sure I type out everything that I say in the chat so people can reference it as they come in. Looks like a pretty good critical mass. So like I said, I'll type this out, but welcome to today's webinar. Before we get started, I just want to cover a few technical details in case you haven't joined us before. We use Zoom webinar, which is very similar to Zoom meeting with a big exception. You as attendees will have your cameras and microphones muted by default. So you don't have to worry about interrupting us, but that does mean you're limited to text interaction for any questions or discussion that you want to have. For discussion or just general comments, the chat is a great feature. Just make sure that you select everyone from the dropdown. Otherwise, only the host and panelists will see it. And if you have a question for the panel, we do ask that you use the Q&A. You just pop your question in there. You can ask those questions anonymously, but other people can view them, comment on them, and give them thumbs up as well. So without further ado, I want to hand it off to William Gill, our Director of Government Relations. Bill.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Mike, thanks for providing that technical overview. Very important to know what to do and sometimes more important what not to do. So thank you very much. Thanks to everybody that's joining us on this Friday afternoon. A little bit of background of how we got here. So the Census reached out when COVID hit 2 years ago. The Census reached out to us to try to help facilitate the gathering of information for student housing. And we worked with them in order to do what institutions could provide the most information. And you know, they went through a whole series, and we had a couple of webinars for our members. I got to give credit. They're already starting to think about 2030, and so a little bit of a while ago, they reached out to us to talk about, they want to be hearing directly from institutions about what some of the things that work, what some lessons learned, and also to start gathering and plan for the 2030 census. So without further ado, let me introduce Dora Durant and Judy Belton, and I'll turn it over to Judy.
Thank you, Bill. And I want to thank AACRAO for hosting this important listening session for the Census Bureau. So as you know, the 2020 census faced many challenges as it relates to counting students because of the pandemic. You know, as you know, the students went home because of the pandemic, and you know, we just faced so many challenges trying to make sure that we counted people where they are, where they were supposed to reside on Census Day. And as a result, many of you as administrators had to answer the census for the students. So today we want to hear from you. We want to hear about some of those challenges that you had. So we appreciate, you know, all of the work that you've done to support the Census Bureau, to support the 2020 census, as well as its other surveys. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Dora Durant, who's going to lead our discussion.
All righty, thank you, Judy. I also want to echo what Judy has said in terms of the 2020 census. But first of all, thank you so much for AACRAO for actually hosting this. And again, we're remembering during the 2020, many of you actually participated in some of the webinars. And so that's why, like Judy said, it's so important that, as you can see the slide deck, outreach to our external stakeholders for 2020 census lessons learned, as we are looking forward to 2030 census. All righty, so as we all know, we know that historically, most of our colleges and universities contact persons mainly selected methods of enumeration that allow students to self-respond. And those two methods were normally what we call our in-person interviews and drop off and pick up of individual census questionnaire package. But because of COVID-19, then many of our students were sent home and they were not living in the student housing at the time of our 2020 census enumeration. So given the dismissal of students from on-campus housing due to the health crisis, then the Census Bureau then began to start reaching out to not just college administrators, but we started reaching out to group quarters administrators across the nation and asking those that had chosen the in-person and the drop-off pickup methods to choose some less face-to-face contact methods, which included e-response or the group quarters paper response data collection option. So, but also due to COVID-19, instead of us actually going in and dealing with residential, those individuals that over residence life, then contact persons included individuals such as registrars and other administrative personnel who had to answer the census on behalf of students using their facility administrative records. Okay, and so and as we also remember, because during the 2020 census, when we saw some of these things coming up and the introduction of e-response, we had a meeting with the Department of Education where many of you probably joined. And at that time, we learned that the e-response and the paper response data collection had FERPA implication. That meant that the schools could provide directory information for each of their students without student consent unless the student had opted out of the disclosure. But schools could not include race, ethnicity, and gender as directory information under FERPA guidelines. So now, looking forward in terms of 2020 lessons learned. So as part of lessons learned, we had a group, the group that was actually reaching out and doing the group quarters enumeration was our group quarters integrated operational team. So we agreed that it was critical to gather lessons learned from you, our gatekeepers, our external stakeholder, as opposed to just only relying on recommendations and just insight that we had from the Bureau, from within the Bureau, which are what we call our internal stakeholders. So as we look forward to 2020, the Census Bureau has approved a wide range of 2030 census projects to help improve data collection experiences internally and externally for decennial operations and surveys. So included in that is engaging all relevant federal, state, and even local entities in pertinent conversations through partnerships such as AACRAO. And this includes the Department of Education, our Department of Defense, a lot of our correctional facilities such as the Bureau of Prisons, Homeland Security, U.S. Marshal Service, Department of Health and Human Service, which are dealing with a lot of our medical facilities, the Bureau of Labor, Department of Housing and Urban, which deal with people, service-based location, people who are experiencing homelessness. Those are a few of the areas that that we are reaching out to. Also, we are looking to working with external stakeholders to establish criteria for participating in Census Bureau decennial census, the American Community Survey, which occurs and probably people every month, somebody is contacting individuals on the different campus, college and university campus, and other surveys, especially those with privacy laws. For example, work with the Department of Education to establish an agreement that all institutions can provide critical data elements to the Census Bureau during the decennial for the American Community Survey or other surveys according to what is needed. So in looking forward, some of the research project plans are to look at additional enumeration methods for 2030, including improving the e-response enumeration methods. So as you will see later on, when I start talking about the feedback of the survey, you'll see that we basically had 5 enumeration methods. But one of the other enumeration methods that we are exploring, thinking about exploring, is called Internet Self-Response for Non-Institutional Group Quarters. So many of you are familiar with the fact that for the 2020 census, we did the Internet self-response methods for individuals that are in housing units. And so we're looking to try to see what that will look for our group quarters. That is an online tool that allows the respondents living in student housing to complete and submit their individual census questionnaire electronically. So the question was, why is internet self-response method being considered? And why is it that I am addressing this and talking about this to the population that with college and university? So for many decades, college students have asked census staff, why can't the Census Bureau provide a link for them to respond to the census instead of having to complete a paper census questionnaire? So we don't know. So even in terms of that, one of the things, even as we are looking at this internet self-response enumeration method, we want to be able to hear from you, our administrators and registrars, what are possibly some of the limitations or issues associated with this proposed enumeration methods. Because when we say provide a link, we don't know. It could be limitations or issues for email address requests there. And then also there could be some other options for providing individual links to college students for tracking purposes, just so that we can make sure that there is a complete enumeration of all students. Okay. So here are, I'm moving into, as Bill mentioned earlier, that we are taking a look at providing maybe a survey. I think that he's probably thinking about sharing with everyone later on. And so some of these are, we decided to put together a set of questions that we thought that will probably universal across GQs in terms of trying to help collect lessons learned. We know that there will be many other questions or different information that individuals will also want to share with us. So right now, so some of the questions that we want to ask, starting with one, is the method of enumeration that individuals chose for the 2020 census. We had the in-person interview, the drop-off pickup of paper questionnaires, a paper response, data collection, listing, and then mail out and mail back a paper response, data collection, listing, or e-response. So let me just make sure that I explain what each one of those are. The electronic response data transfer methodologies, which is what we call e-response. That means that the administrators were tasked to upload administrative response data for students that were residing in their GQs onto a secure Census Bureau server. The drop-off pickup option, which is what most of the historically colleges and universities have been using, which involves census staff dropping off individual census questionnaires, a paper, for the GQ contact person to distribute to residents who were living or staying in their GQ, after which the field staff would return at an appointed time to pick up the completed ICQs, the entire package. Then, of course, there was the in-person interviews, which meant that census staff conducted individual interviews with each resident that was at that GQ. Then we had the paper response data collection, meaning that the GQ contact person actually would probably do a printout of individuals of the students and listing of all of the residents, and then complete that and provide response data for each one of their residents. But due to the COVID-19, we tried to find a different way, and that was less face-to-face contact. We came up with the mail out, mail back of the paper response data collection template, which meant that our area census office staff, they mailed that template to GQ administrators, and the GQ administrators completed, or they populated that template with response data. And then following that, then once we received that, then that information was sent to our National Processing Center to key those results. And again, that method was introduced due to COVID-19. So as you can see, we had 5 methods of enumeration during the 2020 census. Question 2 is what was the preferred method of enumeration? Or was that the preferred method of enumeration that was chosen? If not, what was the reason for the change of the enumeration method at the start? Was it at the start in the data collection process? Then question 3, is there a method of enumeration? Even though we listed that there were 5 that we did, there may be something else, because we understand that a lot of our group quarters, they are also doing things or working with other establishments. And so they may also have an idea of an enumeration method that we have may not considered. So we want to know from you, is there a method of enumeration you would like to see in 2030 that was not used for 2020? Also, being intricately involved with the data collection and providing responses back to us, we also want to know, what could we have done better with what we did? As it relates to the data collection, what could we have done better? In terms of communicating with each one of you or whoever it was that was responsible for collecting, what could we have done better in terms of the communication? What about the frame? Did we have all of the address frame? Because we have different operations where we have the start off with address canvassing, then also, which we will probably have called field address validation. But also we had an advanced contact where we tried to make sure that we had all of the different locations. What could we have done better in terms of making sure that we had all of the correct addresses in building the frame? What about the operational procedures and also instructions to help individuals to complete the enumeration? What could we have done better? And then if you use the e-response method of enumeration, what features worked well? What features presented issues or did not work well? Formatting issues. We had, during the 2020 census, we had an Excel template. Were there formatting issues, and what suggestions would you have to improve the e-response if you use that method? How friendly were the enumeration materials? That's also important. It is important that all of our materials are user-friendly, because we understand that individuals have a lot of things, and when people are dealing with lots, thousands of students, then we want to make sure that the materials are user-friendly, and this is something that can be done in a timely manner. So how user-friendly was the e-response portal if you did e-response? How user-friendly was the individual census questionnaire, and even that paper response data collection template, that therefore the data elements, that they were understood? 7, what improvements would you like to see in our field procedures? Our field procedures are those enumeration methods that included the drop-off pickup, the in-person interview, the paper response data collection, and also the mail-out, mail-back. What improvements would you suggest in those different areas? And then 8, identify any additional problems you or any of your users experience, or anyone in the college or university universe. What any type of problems that anyone can think of. What were the lessons learned from some of the new data collection methods that were used due to COVID-19? What are some suggestions that you would have, possibly if we ever were again in a pandemic or a natural disaster type situations, something like that, God forbid, came up in the future? And then 11, were there any constraints or limitations based on state or federal regulations that created challenges and concerns or issues incorporated into the 2020 census? If so, identify those. We started hearing from different individuals across different states about different layers of limitation or constraints that were outside of FERPA. We were only familiar with the FERPA constraints, but then we started hearing that there were other layers of state laws or legislative laws that had passed a stronger version of student information protection. And, we definitely want our students to be protected, but we want to be able to be knowledgeable about that and try to understand what it is that the Census Bureau can possibly do at some point in time to still make sure that data is still shared, critical data is shared, but also at the same time, making sure that there's a level of confidence in terms of how student information would be protected. Also, what information do you maintain as directory information? We stood and we had heard that different colleges, universities, and schools have different directory information, but we learned a lot more about that during the 2020 census. Because here we have looked at, in terms of directory information, we learned that some of the directory information that many of the colleges had included name, legal or preferred name, major field of study, dates of attendance, grade level classification, the previous college or university that they had attended, degrees received, awards and honors, height and weight information for athletic participation, performance records and participation in competitive events, and participation in officially recognized activities, sports and organizations, individual or group photos and videos, which majority of those, which means the only one that the Census Bureau was interested in is probably name. Because if we look at the last slide, this is the information that the Census Bureau, the individual census questionnaire and the paper response data collection template, including that template that was in the e-response portal, it was asking for name, age, date of birth, sex, race, ethnicity, and the full address of a place one sometime lives or stays, such as their parents' home or other places that they live other than in student housing. So these are some of the things that we learned during the census. And so these are questions that we have out there. And so the Census Bureau, again, in terms of trying to help us to do things a little bit better and learn more about moving forward toward 2030, we will be very much appreciative of the information, getting a response to these various questions. Okay, so that ends the presentation.
So Dora, I want to adding that presentation. Folks, if you guys, now this is a good time for, and if anybody has any questions they would like to have, or any anything that they want to provide in the chat room, this is your forum. As Dora mentioned, AACRAO will be developing, or has developed, a survey. It will be going out on Monday to all the participants of this conversation, and it'll be basically very similar to some of the questions that Dora raised in her presentation. And as you will see, there are quite a few that were open-ended, and so and some of them that probably require a lot of data or reaching out to various other offices within your campuses. So it's specifically been created so it's kind of open until you finally finish it. So you have the opportunity to keep going into it, and then and filling out more information as you get it from your various offices and on your campuses. It's going to be open for quite a while, probably a good month and a half, and then the whole idea is that we will provide this information and feedback to the census. What Dora didn't mention, or Judy, is that internally, if you correct me if I'm wrong, either Judy or Dora, that the census was trying to develop an action paper of lessons learned for by the end of September, and working with the office of the director. So if any changes need to be done, budget requests for Congress or any IT increases, they can start planning for that now, and so it's implemented with enough time in time for the 2030 census. Also, we will be working to create a task force of AACRAO members or individuals that are interested in kind of working with the census, just kind of serve as a kind of a kitchen cabinet when they have questions for institutions of higher education, so that if they have an idea, is it a good idea? Will it work for a campus? Is it feasible? So just wanted to put that out there as well. As we mentioned, We will also be including this in many of our publications and reaching out to in our transcript and Connect and their various other listservs. So please feel free to put some questions in the Q&A. There was a lot of information, but definitely I want to, if you have any questions, have any thoughts, please, this is the time. Otherwise, it will be much shorter than 1 hour. Wait.
This is Mike. I was just going to ask that it's a pretty common question, but is it possible to share the PowerPoint, or is there a way for them to access it on the Census website?
So Mike, we'll share the PowerPoint with you. You can share it with on your website.
Great, awesome.
So that they can have it. Yes. Okay. Yeah, because as you stated, we want to make sure that individuals that are probably not even in attendance, and so and going through this today, there's people are trying to remember what did happen, during the 2020 census, especially since we are here in the year 2022, except for those individuals that may have that is etched in their mind, as I mentioned earlier, that, oh my gosh, we ended up having to try to get these students home, but also at the same time, we end up having to answer the census at the same time. So yeah, we want to make sure that we have that and any other type of information that is needed to be able to help that and be able to come back, or any type of documentation, we'll be glad to share that.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
I see there's a question.
Yeah, it's in the chat there, Bill.
The question is, you mentioned a possible way to partner with the Department of Ed was to create an agreement for institutions to directly share student info with the census. Any other ideas how to partner with the Department of Ed?
Okay, so one of the things that we will be doing, we will be talking to the Department of Education, because one of the things what we want to do is that we want to hear from this population, this group of individuals, in terms of the various concerns and the various issues that they had. Also, as we talked about those last couple of slides, when we talked about directory information, what's there, sometime in terms of knowing whether or not there's any type of consistency, but that will also provide college administrators and representatives some type of level of comfort to be able to share information. So I think one of the things that we have to do is maybe go back to the Department of Education and then try to hear from them what it is that can be done in different type of situation. But it also, we need to also go back with the Census Bureau in terms of what it is that we hear, in terms of talking to our people internally, our security people, our legal representatives also. But I think one of the key things that we want to know is that we don't know about all of the various states that have these other added layers of information, but we just happen to learn about that because of the state of, like you said, the example of the state of Virginia. So I think the more that we are able to learn in terms of what's going on across the various states, that will help us know what it is that we may need to have conversations down at the Department of Education about.
And this is Judy Belton. I would also add that other ways in which we could partner is just, outreach, having information out there that they can share with the various institutions that says, okay, it's okay to participate in the census, and, how you can participate, and just having that clarity, because I think some of the things we heard during 2020 was there was some confusion about what FERPA was clear, but then there was some other confusion there that, in conversations we had to have with various institutions. So if we can partner with them in ways and that how to participate in the census and how to participate in the surveys and having that clarity with the institutions, I think that will help us as well moving forward.
That's very helpful. There is a question. It's in the Q&A, and the question is, there was a lot of confusion as to how and where student data would be captured. Some personnel assumed that student data would be now captured that they were at home, assuming that basically the census data would be from their at home now, and no longer at the university or residence, and that institutions would definitely need more information regarding who needs to give that information in the future.
Okay, so and for any type of confusion, there was we apologize in terms of any type of confusion that was going on during the 2020 census. Now, one of the things that we did do is that we actually ended up having a follow-up session with the Department of Education, and in which we actually put out the document, which was posted on the Department of Education's website and also the Census Bureau website, in which it was addressed to post-secondary institutions of higher learning, that basically stated that students were to be still counted at the college, the university, as to where they would have been staying on April the 1st had it not been for COVID. And I think one of the things is that maybe we just have to try to find a way to make sure that maybe if there are other methods of communication, to make sure that all colleges and universities across the nation have that clarity in terms of when updates are coming out. So I think we pretty much may want to try to take a look at that and have discussions as being a part of that as to what was missing, what else could we have done to try to make sure that everyone had that same knowledge.
Yeah, and we would welcome any institutional members that will encourage the Department of Education to adopt, policies and procedures to assist us with data collection. That would be very helpful.
Yeah, that was a comment from an association that they'll help institutions implement any data collection, as well as work with institutional members to encourage Department of Ed to adopt a beneficial policy agreement when they're identified. So I think there's a general consensus between everybody here that they want to be able to help the census get as much data as possible within the confines of what the Department of Ed deems appropriate. So I think that's basically the takeaway from that comment.
Yeah, I thank you, McGregor. This is very, very good in terms of basically saying that, from your association's perspective, that you are in a position to be able to help us in terms of trying to implement data collections, as well as working with your members to help encourage the Department of Education to adopt those policies and agreements. And again, when we identify, and that is one of the things that we will do, whatever it is that we come up with in terms of conversations, in terms of talking, whatever is I think maybe even probably as we are working through that process of finalizing something to be able to go before Department of Education, that we may have some type of vehicle. AACRAO, probably you will be a vehicle to be able to share how it is that we are trying to come up with some type of final policy or agreement. to carry before to the Department of Education.
Yeah, and we're also planning to work with our institutions, because the whole issue is directory information. And so many folks think that you can only change directory information once. And the truth is, at the beginning of the semester, the truth is that directory information, when an institution deems that directory information can be changed at any time during the school year, they just need to notify the students of what the new directory information is going to be, and then for those that can consent not to, then they can't provide that information. But they just need to provide them a week before they can the new directory information can be adapted. We communicated with our institutions during the 2020 census. I know some of the institutions did change it in order to be able to provide additional information to the census, and we will work with our institutions to do the same for 2030 within the confines of what they can share with the census.
Thank you. I also want just to basically say, again, if there are any additional questions that people will have, just share it with AACRAO, and the Census Bureau will make sure that we provide responses to everyone in a package.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Dora, that if anybody has anything, follow-up questions that you want to include in a separate document to be answered by the census factor after you have the opportunity to kind of think about and review this, you'll send them either to Michelle or Mike or myself, and we'll put together a document and send it over to Judy and Dora, and we'll also put that as a resource. We'll obviously send the response directly to you, but we'll also kind of compile the FAQ from the institution perspective and put it on our webpage as a resource.
And it looks
All right.
like, oh yeah, go ahead, Bill, if you want to wrap us up.
Nope. I think we reached the end. This was we had an hour and we covered a lot. I felt like the fire hose drill, but it is a lot of information that that they learned. I think it's a great opportunity for us to go back and talk to our various members and institutional colleagues about this webinar. And again, a survey will be open, will be sent out to all the participants on Monday morning, and it's going to be open for a while for everybody to have the opportunity to kind of gather as much information as we possibly can. Again, this will be sent over to the census, and they, as I mentioned, they want to have a lessons learned and lessons moving forward by the end of September. So I want to thank the census, specifically Judy and Dora, for reaching out to us. I want to thank everybody for participating, and I know that we all want to make sure that we took some good lessons and we can kind of implement them for the 2030 census. So thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon and enjoy the weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.